Hunting our bus, the journey onward by Master Atlan, Chapter 31, The Squire's Polite. He was weightless. It was amazing. The sensation like gravity had let him go, and he was floating in the air. He remembered one other time he felt like this, and that was when the Death Stalker sent him flying over the treetops. Wait, he wasn't flying then. He was thrown and gradually falling. All right, that's what's happening right now. Gah! John yelled as he landed straight on his back after getting thrown across the stage. He groaned and used his shield and sword to lift himself back up before looking at his opponent. Carter Winchester strolled forward with an extra bit of swagger in his step. His mace was propped up on his shoulder with an unbearably conceited smirk on his face. This guy just loved knocking him down on his back, not just when he smacks books out of his hands or pins him in the doorway with his own shield, or at the time with the rocket lockers. He adored the moments when he knocked him around like a doll for everyone in their class to see. Not that that was anything different for John, whether he fought Naruto or Ruby or Kibo or Blake. It all ended the same way, but Conan was different. He relished in putting him down. John steadied himself up to his feet and held Corsair Moors up to prepare for another go. Conan noticed his second wind and smiled even more as he hefted his mace off his shoulders. He spun the massive weapon in his grip once before holding it out towards the blonde leader. John narrowed his eyes and stood his ground. The various cheers and calls from the people around them did nothing to calm his nerves. Neither did the big explosive weapon that he knew for a fact could nearly split open a skull with one bad hit. The weird thing was, even though John was scared at the moment, Conan wasn't the scariest person he had ever crossed. The other people and friends he had the misfortune of being pitted against all overwhelmed him, but they never attacked with malice. The person that had that in spades and held the trophy for most frightening person John ever faced off against had to be the Wilson guy they beat. That guy was just filled with bad intentions and killing intent when they faced off against him, wielding that crazy big sword and letting all that dust energy surge off it like a storm of elements. That was terrifying. Even though Carden was scary, he wasn't nearly as bad as that guy was, and that gave John enough confidence to keep getting up and fighting the armor-clad bully. Unfortunately, even though John had faced a scary opponent and had some phantom sense of security in that fact, his skills and abilities hadn't caught up with that courage. He yelled and charged forward with his sword at the ready. Carden halted his walk and held his mace up to defend. John brought his sword down and across as quickly as he could against Carden, who lazily blocked them with minimal effort. His smirk never wavered, even against the clash in metal and sparks happening in front of him. John's wide and unsteady swings bounced against the larger teen's unmoving weapon, but the blonde persisted. He raised his sword up to bring it down. Ha! And Carden just turned and let the sword swing down beside him, leaving John completely open for an elbow jab to the nose. The Juniper leader stumbled back and Carden wildly swung his mace around towards his chest. On instinct, John raised up his shield and blocked the huge weapon before it could directly hit him. But the force of the attack was so powerful that John was lifted off his feet again and sent flying. Ugh! Oh, no, thank you, beautiful and surprisingly durable shield. You had saved his lanky behind yet another time in the long list of saves. With his solar plexus intact, but unsurprisingly heavy, John groggily lifted himself up on his feet. He took a few deep, haggard breaths before looking up to see Carden approaching at a faster pace. He quickly raised his shield. Clang! John nearly felt his arm pop off when Carden swung his mace into the side of the shield and sent it clattering across the stage. With the pressure lingering on his chest and his only defense knocked away, panic gripped the blonde's mind. He looked up and saw Carden standing over him and reeling back for another attack. There, his wind-up was bigger than it needed to be. If he attacked now, maybe he could. Hesitation and dread overtook his mind and he froze. He couldn't attack. Just as the mace was coming down, John forced his hands up and blocked the jagged weapon before it could hit him. The force behind the attack pushed him down to his knee and he grit his teeth, strenuously holding the mace back. Carden's grin grew wider as he looked down at the armored blonde straining to hold off his attack. He applied just a little more strength and caused John to groan in effort. He chuckled and cockily asked, "You want to surrender before you get hurt?" No, thank you. Even in the unfavorable situation, John tried to keep his cool and sound strong like he knew he should. He kept his grip firm and pushed back as much as he could. All right to keep going until this is over. Good to know. He pressed the button. Boom! Ah! John screamed as the explosion knocked him back with incredible force and slid across the floor with smoke rising off him. He laid on the floor with a gasp as a loud tone ran over them. Cardin smirked. "It's over!" The lights turned on and Cardin proudly hefted his mace onto his shoulder while standing out for everyone to admire. Linda walked over and nodded. "That was a nice showing, Mr. Winchester. A bit too rough just for a sparring match, but nonetheless good work." Cardin seemed to revel in the recognition before she turned to the other member of the fight. "Mr. Ark." The blonde sighed and sat up to better face the older woman as she lowered her riding crop at his side. "I understand the bravado and confidence to face your opponent, but if they can overwhelm and disarm you like that, I would suggest you approach the matter differently." She waved her crop over on, and his shield floated back in his hand. "And once again, please be aware of your scroll and its aura display feature. That will show where your aura is gauged at, and whether you should risk attacking or staying defensive." He wanted to argue that in a moment like that, when he was so focused on fighting, he wouldn't think about looking for his scroll and checking his aura, but he was currently on his ass and had lungs filled with soot, so he was probably right. "Yes, ma'am." The hunters looked up at all her students. "Everyone, remember that soon the first preparation for the final festival will be underway, and not long after that will the first students be arriving here as well. So prepare for a much more crowded setting situation, and to show the other students just how much you've learned here at Beacon." And there were some whoops and cheers of agreement. "That's enough for today. You're dismissed." The students started filing out, and John hefted himself back to his feet with the little shred of aura he still had left. He shifted his shield back into a sheath and holstered his weapon before catching a look at Cardin. The taller boy sent him a dirty scowl before making his way back to the lockers. The juniper leader sighed and made his way back too. Wins, 0 across the board. Loses, more than he could count. So, how much had he learned since he came to Beacon? Because it felt like nothing had changed. Hunting. And there we were, having traveled a great distance without any food or water. Our stomachs churned, our knees buckled, weak from exhaustion. We and many others just like us had finally left the vessel we had been traveling on for many days and nights. We walked and found ourselves at the gates of the forest, of the largest, mightiest castle there ever was. We paused, and the full weight of this new place bearing down on us for the first time. We prepared to march forward, but we were blocked by a great animal with snarling teeth. He growled and threatened to hurt us with his claws and fangs, but I disarmed the mighty beast by patting his head and trying to find his ears, and soon we became great friends. Oh, wait, hold up. He interrupted the story before it could go any further and tilted his head. "Is this a story about how you and Ren met me on the first day? Because it sounds oddly—" "Shh!" Nora cut him off and glared at him innocently. "Hey, did I interrupt you when you're telling your awesome dream stories?" Kiba blinked with confusion. "No, then sip it." She sat down. "Anyway, I tamed the mighty beast and continued down the path. I then found a great basin of water where I drank off the water and— You harassed me, and then you ran off to run around and play in the fountain," Kiba pointed out. "Yeah, this is all everything that happened on the first day we came here." Nora's mouth slammed shut, and her nose clicked in anger. She plopped down in her seat, crossing her arms and patting at Kiba. "You ruined it. I hope you're happy." Ugh. There was a loud groan of disappointment as Yang deflated and glared at the Tonfa user. "Way to go, Kiba! There goes my dinner and a show." An amused smile came over Naruto's face as he heard his partner grunt and argue indignantly with Yang and Nora. He chuckled and enjoyed the playful bickering as he looked around at the others at the table. Most of them were just watching the argument starting to gain steam. Some of them were locking themselves out of it before it got any worse. But he kept looking until he landed on one miserable person in particular. John was just looking down at his food and poking at it with his utensils. The dopey other blonde had never looked this sad and pensive before, as even his appetite was ruined by his thoughts. And apparently, Naruto wasn't the only one who had noticed. Pierre was immediately aware of her partner's dejected demeanor from the moment they had sat down for lunch, as was Ruby, because the silver-eyed girl looked very aware and worried of the conflict their friend was going through. The whiskered blonde looked back over at John, unaware of their worry for him before he spoke up. "You okay, man?" The dark boy kept fiddling with his food before he realized that no one had answered Naruto's question. He looked up and saw that several of their friends were looking towards him, waiting for an answer. He immediately sat up and stuttered when he realized they were addressing him. "Wait, what did you say?" "I asked if you were okay." "Oh," he immediately smiled and nodded, said, "Oh yeah, I'm fine." None of their expressions had changed, most likely not believing his claim in the slightest. He continued on. Guys, I'm fine, really. I'm just not all that hungry right now. No appetite is all. John, Ruby asked, her little voice carrying a tinge of worry and doubt at his false reassurance. There's something bothering you, isn't there? He shook his head, and a scoff came out a little too quickly to deny the subject. Bothering me? What would be bothering me? I'm just not that hungry. It's Cardin, isn't it? John paused and looked towards Pyrrha to see her sad, concerned look for his safety. The red-haired champion gently grabbed his shoulder as the others put their full attention on the subject at hand. John, you've been very distracted recently, and I think it's because of Cardin tormenting you. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't totally right either, but she wasn't wrong. In torment, he looked around at the others and saw they all had looks that conveyed they agreed with her opinion. He seemed to swallow some worry in his throat before he smiled. Okay, I get the worry, but tormenting might be a little much, don't you think? I mean, yeah, Cardin's a bit rough and arrogant and inconsiderate and a jerk, asshole, a bully, asshole, degenerate. Did you mention asshole? Okay, so there are a few strong opinions on the guy. That was an understatement, and I admit that he's kind of a jerk too. Some of them gave him skeptical looks at his concerned description of his fellow first year, but he ignored them. But it was a match in sparring class. Violence and getting knocked around like that is sort of part of the course. Nathan asked. And what about when he knocks you around outside of class too? His expression faltered a little before he stifled, and he groaned, and it sat inside that would have slipped out unconsciously. He mustered a smile and just shrugged to unconvincingly assure his friends, "Guys, I'm fine. Really, it's not that bad." Naruto shook his head. "John, if you want." The others waited for him to finish, but the blonde's eyes had furrowed and focused into a glare at something behind John's back. The others followed his gaze and landed on what he was glaring at. Carter and his cronies were seated a few tables across from them, cackling like annoying animals and pointing mockingly at their target. Carter himself was laughing nervously as he roughly handled and pulled on the long brown bunny ear in his head. "Ow! See, I told you she could feel with these things." Cotton chuckled and sent another wave of laughter through his teammates as he pulled on Velvet's ear a little more and elicited a yelp of pain from the fondness. "You guys think she can hear things all over the campus with these babies?" Velvet winced and tried to ignore the pain of having her ears manhandled like this. She opened one eye and mumbled painfully, "Please stop." Yeah, don't worry." Cardin droned out with no actual meaning or weight behind his words before he smirked. "Hey, what kind of dirty secrets have you heard around the school with these big old ears of yours?" The other first years stared at the scene in shock and disgust before Tintin frowned. "What the hell does he think he's doing?" "Both is a second year," Ruby said before looking between the others. "Doesn't he know she's an upperclassman? He doesn't care." Blake said under her voice, her eyes filled with contempt and her voice conveying complete revulsion for the act happening in front of her. Her hands tensed and squeezed the book tightly as she contained herself. All he sees is someone he can harass and wouldn't do anything to fight back. Yang noticed the scorn in her partner's expression and the tension of her hands at the sight. She hated watching people like Cardin bully others just as much as anyone, but there was such a powerful, painful weight in seeing someone as timid and kind as Velvet get the focus of it. Even more so when she was a Faunus. If anyone had tried to do something like that to her or Ruby, she would have knocked them on their asses and kept kicking until that person ran. But for a Faunus, they either had come to expect that kind of treatment or learned to live with it for fear that it might cause more trouble if they retaliated. It made her stomach twitch. She knew that her pity would probably be misplaced, but she still felt it all the same. Weiss looked conflicted. She wanted desperately to seem indifferent and apathetic to the mistreatment, as so many others in the room did as well. She knew why she would feel that way, and did what she could just to focus on coloring her nails again, like she was moments ago. She didn't have anything against the rabbit faunus personally, yet Weiss didn't want to go out of her way to mingle or approach her, and yet hearing her whimpers and listening to the big oaf chortle like that made her shake with something she couldn't explain. She hesitated, and the Harris looked over at the table to see if someone else in particular was as conflicted with this issue as her, as she expected. Sasuke looked stone-faced and focused solely on staring at his food despite not even touching it. His eyes seemed to narrow with each laugh and yelp as he forced himself to stay seated. Weiss could understand why, despite whatever it was he wanted to do, he couldn't react. Even though Uchiha forced himself into the matter, whether it was to help the Faunus or assist the Tormentor, there would be a massive backlash from the rest of the student body. Rumors and accusations would fly faster than a bullhead, and people all over school would start saying unseemly things about him. Faunus would accuse him of trying to use them for some kind of good publicity, and humans would start pointing out that he should be the worst of the lot because of his heritage. So in order to avoid that can of worms and the mountains of problems that would follow, Sasuke remained silent, despite his reluctance to do so. "Hey, Cardin!" Everyone in the cafeteria turned towards their table and looked to see Kiba standing up with a scowl on his face. He was seething with anger as he yelled out and pointed at the armor-clad teen. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Cardin furrowed his eyes and lifted the rabbit ear higher up to show the tattooed boy. Bobby gasped and shaking from the pain. "I'm just learning more about the wonderful advantages of being a Faunus. What are you doing?" And Kiba cracked his knuckles. "Holding myself back from making you cry for mommy." And Cardin scoffed and stood off of his seat as the rest of Cardinal had looked towards him as well. "I don't get why you're so pissy. It's not like we're hurting anyone. Hell, I bet there are a few of your friends over there that would love to come and try it too," he said, gesturing towards Wise and Sasuke and earning a deadly glare from the white-haired girl. "We're just having some fun and good laughs, so don't..." Cardin grunted and moaned through his teeth when he felt the tight grip lock on his wrist and twisted. His eyes twisted in pain, and he saw the rest of his team look over in surprise before he did the same. He made sure not to turn too quickly and injure himself any worse as his hold on the Faunus ear had been released. Instead, he was met with the glaring blue eyes and frown of the Uzumaki kid who stood between him and the bunny. Naruto applied more pressure to his grip, Cardin shutting his mouth to make sure not even a pained gasp got out as the blonde spoke angrily. "No one is laughing, Cardin. Just you and your little squad of jackasses." Cardin ignored the pain and twisted his face into one of anger at the sight of the blonde. Velvet felt the tension between them and stepped back while gently rubbing the sting out of her ear. The Winchester harshly pulled his wrist out of Naruto's grip before standing up tall and leering down at the shorter leader. If the obvious difference in size intimidated him, he didn't show it. "What's wrong? Something got your panties in a notch?" Cardin noticed Velvet step back and stood up to say something, but Naruto got up in his face and blocked any action he was about to make. The Winchester boy looked back down at his scowl and scoffed. "You sure you want to tussle with me, Whiskers? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time we fought, didn't I nearly break your skull open and make you run in fear?" Instead of making him angry with the goading, Naruto just smirked and chuckled lightly at Cardin. The Cardinal leader looked at him oddly before Naruto shook his head. "You're wrong, Cardin. Remember, you were doing such a piss-poor job of fighting, I had to basically disarm you and break my own head with your weapon, trying to give you a handicap." Naruto grinned mockingly. "And you still lost?" Cardin snarled and felt his eye twitch before taking a breath and composing himself. He wasn't going to let this brat get under his skin. Plus his whole team was right behind him, so if anything started, they had his back. Getting his confidence back, Cardin just gave a lopsided grin in return. "Well, you can try whatever you want, Uzumaki. I can take the hits unlike you. You might want to make sure you don't run off crying if I give you a boo-boo. You can go ahead and try it if you want. Bet money you won't land a hit." Naruto egged him on with his own cocky grin. "You're just gonna have to go around with your goons annoying other people and trying to act like a big man again, you bitch." And Cardin snapped and grabbed the collar of Naruto's orange vest before pulling him up with a glare. "What'd you say to me, you little bastard?" As if on cue, Naruto's friends jumped up to their feet and prepared for the confrontation that would start with the first thrown fist. The members of Cardinal stood as well, looking a bit frightful at the idea of fighting outnumbered but supporting their leader. Cardin scowled and gripped Naruto's collar tighter as the blonde showed his teeth and clenched his fist tightly. "Excuse me, gentlemen." They looked over to see the stout stature of Professor Port standing behind Cardin with his eyes closed and mouth hidden by his mustache. The rather diminutive huntsman looked between the two quarreling young men and spoke with much energy in his voice. "I couldn't help but notice this little dispute you were about to initiate and decided to pop over and ask what was the matter." Cardin narrowed his eyes and looked towards Naruto for a moment before faking a smile to the teacher. "Nothing, Professor Port. Me and my good buddy Naruto were just having a friendly little argument. You know how us boys do sometimes." "Oh, indeed." The grim studies instructor bellowed with a mighty slap of his gut and nodded. "I remember in my youth when I used to horse around with my compatriots in good fun. A rip-roaring good time." He laughed a little more before his eyes turned serious, and all the jovial ease left his voice. "Unfortunately, I am a teacher, and I will not entertain such behavior. Now, Mr. Winchester, why don't you release your hold on Mr. Uzumaki's collar?" Cardin's scowl deepened as his effort to pass this off as a little fun jostling totally failed under the huntsman's gaze. He looked down at the blonde in his grasp before tossing him back, getting some satisfaction from the fact Naruto obviously needed to balance himself out to avoid falling over. Peter turned to the blonde in turn. "And Mr. Uzumaki, how about you uncurl your fist and stop snarling at your fellow student?" Naruto seemed to still be fuming and looked towards the red-clad huntsman for a moment before calmed down and his face relaxed, his arms loosening their tension and releasing his fist. "Wonderful!" Peter nodded between both boys. "Now the cafeteria is used to replenish your hungry bellies and restore some of that always necessary stamina," he announced proudly with a jiggle of his belly. "If you are finished eating and are brim with energy, might I suggest doing something outside of the cafeteria? Others still need to nourish themselves." "Well said, Professor." Cardinal nodded before jerking his head towards the door. "Come on, guys, we're done here." He and Cardinal started making their way back into the room as the tall leader made sure to knock his shoulder roughly into Naruto's. The blonde looked back with a glare as the bully smiled. "See you later, pal." Naruto scowled, watched the team of assholes make their way out of the cafeteria. He felt shuffling and missing presence behind him and realized Port had left as well. Naruto was bristling with anger and madness, but someone else needed his attention as he ran towards another exit in a hurry. Team Ruby, Juniper, and Noctic sat back down after the very tense situation had ceased. There were a few collective sighs of relief that there wasn't any fight that came up with the confrontation, and just as many sighs of disappointment that there wasn't one. "Hey, I just had a great idea," Nora announced with a grateful smile. "Why don't we get that guy Cardin, ask him not to bully people anymore, and pop a kneecap or two to get the message across? Who's with me?" It was scary just how tempting that idea was. "Hunting. Velvet, wait up!" The bunny girl stopped walking down the hallway and massaging her aching ear when she heard her friend come running up behind her. She turned to face him as a relieved smile came over her to see him worry. I'm glad you didn't decide to catch up to the other guy and pick a fight." Naruto glared back and then spat with some venom. "That guy will get his ass kicked one of these days, don't worry." His face softened back into one of concern when he looked back towards his older friend. "But that doesn't matter. What about you? Did he hurt you bad? Are you okay?" Velvet felt happy about his genuine concern for her well-being, even if he didn't handle the situation with the most tact. She nodded and kept rubbing the length of her left ear to ease the pain going through it. I'm fine." And she noticed his face didn't change, and she repeated, "Really, I'm fine. My ears just sting a little is all." Naruto still looked worried about his friend's current state and let his eyes drift up to her ears. He asked, "Do you want some help taking care of them?" "What?" Velvet shrieked with a fierce blush on her face as she immediately protected her ears. She realized what he said and the lack of any leer or ulterior motives in his expression. She decided to deflect from any indecent thought that might come to her mind at the time. Her ears were very sensitive, and the idea of someone rubbing them gently to help her. She shook her head and tried to ride the blush on her face as quickly as possible. No, I'm okay handling them on my own, but thank you for the offer." She was able to mutter loud enough for him to hear, but when she looked up again, she saw the conflict from his face. She lowered her hand and asked, "What's wrong?" Naruto stayed silent before finally asking, "Why didn't you do anything to stop him?" Velvet seemed to know that question was coming as her shoulders slumped. "I bet you're strong, Velvet. I bet you could have sent that jerk flying if you wanted to." Maybe she could have, but she didn't. She lowered her gaze a little. "That only would have made more problems." That wasn't good enough. Naruto shook his head. "What about your team or the teachers? We could tell them that this is happening. They could do something about it." I don't want them to." Naruto's voice died when he heard the Phonics girl's soft reply to his loud statement. He blinked in shock and reeled back a little before seeing Velvet slowly look back up towards him. "What? I don't want them to get involved," Velvet repeated with a shake of her head. "If Coco and the others heard about this, they would probably make a big scene and things would spiral out of control. I love them, but stuff like this, I just know how it works." The Noctic's leader stayed silent as Velvet crossed her arms and rubbed her bicep for comfort. "There are always people like this, Naruto. Always people that will give us dirty looks and lingering glares and go out of their way to move around us. Always people like that guy. And even if I did something to him, report him, or even put him in his place, that would just open up another spot for someone else to come and join their side." Velvet seemed to shake a little and spoke up a little louder. "Not that we could even fight back anymore if we wanted. If we retaliate or cause any sort of trouble, people automatically simply think we're unstable or violent or even a part of the White Fang. If we try to defend ourselves, that could easily be misconstrued as a violent act, and things will get harder. Naruto felt his heart break a little as he heard the rabbit Faunus take a shaky breath to calm herself, her voice momentarily hitching before she shook her head. She turned back towards him and he noticed a soft redness around her eyes. I just can't let people like him see that they are affecting me. That's the quickest way to make them stop. Let them realize what they're doing means nothing to me, and they'll just give up. That's how I've been doing it for years. He understood. He completely understood. He had experienced that kind of contradictory defense and retaliation before, and he hated how he could rationalize the idea that letting people like Cardin get tired of their harassing was an effective way to make them stop. Naruto made a small gulp as his fist clenched tightly. He exhaled through his nose before slowly reaching up towards his head. Velvet, I'm sorry, Naruto, but I have to get going, the second-year girl said before she turned around and started making her way towards her team rooms. I think I need a moment to decompress and just be around my team. They always help when I'm feeling down. She started making her way down the hall before stopping. She turned around and gave the boy a grateful smile. Thank you. Thank you for standing up for me like you did. I think I could count on one hand the number of people that would come to my side in like that so quickly. The whiskered teen lowered his hand again before he could reach his bandana as he smiled and said before leaving, You're a really good person, Naruto. Good. Him? Hunting. Now, leading up to the Faunus Rights Revolution, or more colloquially known as the Faunus Wars, humans were adamant on segregating and relocating the Faunus to Menagerie, a small reservation on the edge of the map with enough space they believed to house a majority of the Faunus population. As such, a major Faunus militia was formed and retaliated against the forces of the established kingdoms in an effort to earn their civil liberties and rights, Rublik said without taking a breath between his words as he continued. Now, during this dispute, the White Fang had first begun to establish itself as a force for the Faunus, but not through violence. No. For those of you that were not aware of or merely forgot, the White Fang was first established as a peaceful, non-violent protest group advocating the harmony and unity of mankind, Faunus and human alike, but the White Fang and their past and how their goals and methods shifted will be the topic of another class. Right now, we're focusing on the time of the war. The students either gave the spirited teacher their full attention or weren't even bothering to listen to the lecture he gave about war. The excitable green-haired man dashed around the room. Now there were many battles waged between the two forces during the course of this war, and for the longest time it appeared that the humans were going to emerge victorious. However, there was one battle in particular that marks the turning point of the war and helped the Faunus claim victory. Can anyone name that battle? Yes, the Battle of Fort Castle. Quite right, Miss Schnee, thank you. The hare seemed proud that she had earned that praise as the history teacher continued. Now, general longest losses can be attributed to inexperience and underestimating his opponents. He did not take into account many factors about the Faunus and their natural abilities, but the one that proved most useful to the Faunus at this time was anyone. The spectac teacher looked around before zeroing on someone that was barely even listening. Mr. Ark, care to share your thoughts on what the Faunus advantages was? John sat straight up with a panic in his eyes at being called on. His hands interlocked and forced to squeeze each other so he didn't start fidgeting around for something. He gave a skittish laugh. Could you repeat the question? I asked what was the advantages that secured the Faunus victory of the Fort Castle. Oh, well, at least he knew the question. He had no godly idea what the answer was, but he wasn't blind about the question anymore. Psst. John's eyes shifted over to his side and saw Naruto slowly slide a piece of paper from under his arm. Oh, he wished he could convey the pure, unbridled amount of gratitude to his friend for the help. He attempted to lean over with some subtlety to view the answer. And please don't look at the answer Mr. Uzumaki is attempting to feed you. Both blondes immediately shot up in their seats and avoided looking towards each other. Damn, so close. John shuddered. Oh well, the advantage the Faunus had in the fight was that his eyes darted and scoured the entire room for some kind of answer. The board was covered in maps and notes, but they were so far away they were basically scribbles. He noticed something in the corner of his eye and spotted Blake lifting up her notebook with something written over the whole page. He was so thankful to the aloof girl, except her cursive was too fancy and he couldn't read it. Pyrrha, his partner, was doing something. She was pantomiming and motioning the right answer for him. Oh, thank you, kind and benevolent champion partner. Now, she was rotating her hands around her eyes like she was focusing on something. Binoculars? No, that sounds silly. She started taking the covers around the eyes and extending them out. They could take their eyes out. The ridiculous answer, along with the terrible tone John answered it in, got a wave of laughs around the room. Blake sighed apathetically and Pyrrha palmed her face as John blushed with embarrassment. Oobleck shook his head. No, Mr. Ark, the Faunists did not get their advantages by taking out their eyes. Although I'm sure they could, even if they could, that would have frightened Longus' forces to retreat. Mr. Uzumaki, since you seem so ready to help Mr. Ark, why do you give us the answer? It's night vision, Naruto responded. Login didn't remember that Faunists see in the dark, so when he attacked them at night, he ran in blind while the Faunists could see clear as day, so they took out a majority of his guys and captured him. The green-haired teacher nodded before a familiar voice spoke up behind Naruto and John. You know, I heard stories that the Faunists riled up and led Grimm through the areas and the humans marched through so that they would get too tired from killing Grimm to fight them properly. Seems like a pretty cowardly tactic those guys used back in the day, am I right? Several people in the classroom rolled their eyes at the comment made by the insensitive bully. Pierre looked over at the lounging orange-haired boy and spoke. You know, you shouldn't put so much belief in every story or myth you hear getting passed around. Blake nodded. People may think you're more naive and foolish than they already do. The Winchester teen sat up in his seat and sent a glare towards the girls with contempt. What are you saying? She's saying you should keep your mouth shut so people don't realize you're an idiot. Doctor said with a patronizing smirk back towards Cardin. You should think about taking that advice. Cardin grit his teeth and stood out of his chair. Mr. Winchester, please sit down. Mr. Uzumaki, I would appreciate it if you didn't instigate fights with your fellow classmates while we're learning. There is a time and place for that, and it's called sparring class. The bell rung over the room and the coffee-guzzling teacher nodded. Well, I suppose that's the end of class. You're all dismissed. Mr. Winchester, Mr. Uzumaki, and Mr. Ark. The three boys froze in their spots before they could leave as Oobleck lowered his glasses to show his vibrant blue eyes. I would like to speak with you three for a moment. Shit. Hunting. Pyrrha looked down at the floor and dug her feet into the towel as she waited for her leader outside the classroom. She had been waiting for Professor Oobleck to finish admonishing the three young men for at least 10 minutes now. She worried for both John and Naruto. Not so much for Cardin. You are dismissed. The green blur dashed out of the room and nearly knocked the warrior over from the sheer air pressure in his wake. She waved her arms around wildly to balance herself before getting a good foundation and sparing herself the embarrassment of falling on her butt. Cardin was the first to walk out of the room, a frustrated scowl on his face as he stepped out with anger in his gait. Pyrrha met the taller boy's eyes and they shared a hateful stare before he continued on. Naruto walked out with his arms behind his head as John followed with a more shamed motion in his walk. Well, that was a whole lot of fun. How was it? She asked both leaders. Cardin got told off for aggressive behavior, and I got told off for misbehavior, Naruto said with a frown and a sigh. And now we have to write another essay about some huge chunk of the book, like we didn't just finish writing our midterms the other day. Pierre looked over at John to see his sad expression and silence on the matter. The scraggly blonde noticed her gaze, and he gave a solemn shake. Oobleck thinks I've been too absent-minded and not taken the class seriously, and that my work has been stagnant. Naruto nodded at John's inquiry before scowling. Don't worry about it, man. He's a teacher. That's just the kind of stuff he says. The bandana-wearing teen patted his friend's shoulder in a show of comfort. It'll be all right. John didn't look convinced before he forced a small smile and nodded at Naruto's words. The whiskered blonde smiled in return before stretching out. Well, I've got an essay to work on and an entire team to convince that I didn't do anything wrong. He walked off down the hallway and waved the pair goodbye. They waved him off in return before John looked around the empty hallway. Where's Ren and Nora? I sent them off ahead to get dinner, and we'll catch up. But first, Pierre grabbed John's hand with both of hers. The blonde teen looked at her in surprise before she smiled brightly and motioned behind her. I want to show you something. Pierre quickly pulled him along, and John followed as he was dragged through hallways and corridors until they reached the flight of stairs. He followed her lead all the way to the top until they emerged from the door and into the night air. Pierre, what's this about? What are we... Well... John and Pierre walked over the roof of the dormitory and stood close to its edge to see out into the surrounding area, the multiple buildings and housing facilities that stood around them, the mix of road and greenery below, and a magnificent view of the tower with the clear sight of the stars and even the moon. Pierre rapidly looked over and spoke. I thought you would like to come here, help you with your worries. And John blinked and looked down over the edge of the roof in worry before stepping back with a chill. He chuckled nervously. Up here, just be sure you're not advising me to take a long walk off the short roof, right? Pure looked at the edge and then her friend, fiercely looking between them both before shaking her head and yelling, "Absolutely not!" She stepped back and pulled John along as well before she composed herself and looked at him accusingly. "That was in horrible taste." He just shrugged and gave a little snort of amusement. Even if he was feeling down, and talking with Pyrrha cheered him up. "John," and Pyrrha's voice took on an edge of warmth and concern as she stepped up to get his attention. "I know you've been having a rough time lately." John lowered his head and his eyes lidded. "Cardin certainly hasn't been making these days easy, and you're worried about classes, but I want to help." John blinked a few times for clarity before looking back at her. "Help? Yes," Pyrrha nodding. "I know you're not the strongest fighters, and you have a hard time during the sparring classes, but you keep fighting and trying, which shows so much spirit and fortitude, and I admire that in you. So?" Pyrrha smiled brightly and motioned to the surroundings. "I'd like to train with you. We can meet together after classes are over and spar up here when no one can bother us. I promise after a few lessons you'll notice a stark difference in your behavior. We'd have to work together a lot, but I know you can do it. What do you say?" John was speechless, staring at the smiling and hopeful face of his partner. After she finished stating her offer, the little Juniper felt a strange sensation run through his body as he comprehended what she said, a mix of sadness and defeat and reluctance and... "I really am that bad, aren't I?" Pierre's smile quickly fell as she realized he had taken her words in the wrong light. She reeled back and shook her head. No, John, that's not what I meant." He gave a sad smile and shook her head. "But it's true, right?" He turned away from her and his shoulders slumped before he chuckled self-deprecatingly. "I suck at this." "John, don't say that." Pyrrha denied completely. We have hard times, points where we feel at our lowest, and don't think we can do anything right, but I promise that you'll get over it. You're a leader. You're here at Beacon with us. That speaks volumes of what you're capable of doing." "It really doesn't." Pyrrha heard him mumble. "What do you mean? I mean, I don't deserve to be here." Pyrrha always knew John was the kind of guy that talked down about himself and focused on his faults, but she couldn't let that statement stand. She shook her head. "John, don't say something like that. That's not true." Yes, it is," he said sternly, "and I don't just mean because I'm not good enough." Pyrrha was bewildered by what he said. "What are you talking about?" "I mean, I don't deserve to be here," he said, his voice becoming louder and startling the redhead with the anger in his eyes. "I mean, no one invited me to come here." The image of a red-hooded girl came to mind. "No one thought I deserved to come here." A whiskered boy with a bandana passed through. "I didn't prove myself or gain the strength to even apply here." The image of all the people he called comrades and friends settled into his head as he looked up at his shocked partner. "I never should have come to Beacon in the first place. I'm here because I cheated." "What?" "I cheated. I faked my papers. I got through the test and was accepted here on a lie," John said with more than a tinge of self-loathing in his voice. "I don't deserve to be here like any of you." The red-haired warrior just looked at him in complete confusion as she tried to process what he said. She struggled and only found a single word. "Why?" "This is what I wanted. This is all I ever wanted." John pointed out towards the school. "My family has been huntsmen and heroes for years. They helped people and saved people and did what they could every day, and that's all I wanted to. I wanted to be a hero. I wanted to help." He smashed his teeth and shook with anger. "But I can't do it. I wasn't strong enough, skilled enough. I couldn't get into a training school in time and come into a place like this. There was no other way, so I faked my way in, and I thought I could make it up from there." He grit his teeth again and looked back at her with a mix of rage and despair in his eyes. "But I haven't. I haven't been able to do anything. I'm not the great fighter Ruby is. I'm not the hero Naruto can become. I'm not the awesome student like Wise Ren. I'm not powerful like Nora. And," he looked into her eyes, "I'm not like you." Her voice trembled as she noticed tears nearly fill his eyes. "But if I don't do anything, I'll just stay like I am, the lovable goofball that can't even pull out his sword and fight while the rest of his friends risk their lives. I don't want to become the burden, the load you guys have to carry and protect. I want to become a hero, someone you guys can rely on, someone who can lead you and protect you when he needs to. And if I can't do that myself, Then I'm worthless. Pure looked at him in horror before her eyes softened with sadness. Her emerald orbs threatened to spill ears to tears as she reached out. John, he shied away from her reach and turned around so he wouldn't face her. His shoulders shook and his fist clenched into his palm, but he didn't dare face her. The redhead lowered her hand before reluctantly nodding. Okay, understand. I'm sorry. No, please don't apologize. This wasn't your fault. It was his. He wanted to say that, and the words danced on the tip of his tongue before he heard the door open and close behind him. He turned around and saw that he was alone on the roof. He lowered his head and started grinding his teeth in anger. Holy shit! That was some heavy stuff. His head jerked up and he looked around desperately before finally spotting where the voice had come from. Cardin was speaking over the edge of the roof with a surprised, almost gleeful smile on his face. Cardin? Yep. The taller boy hefted himself onto the roof with a giddy tone in his voice. I opened up the window to my room for some fresh air, and I heard the whole thing. Johnny, 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 he repeated with a grin. You're a bad, bad boy. Fear and horror gripped John's mind as he panicked. He felt his throat dry up and his tongue notch. Cardin, what you heard, I can. He struggled before shaking his head. Please, you can't tell anyone. Oh, don't worry, I won't. John blinked and looked up at him. You won't? Nah, see, I'm just in too good of a mood to think about that right now. Maybe later I'll consider telling someone about it. John face paled before Cardin wrapped an arm around the blonde shoulder. But I bet you and I can work something out, Johnny. We can? Yeah, see, if you can help me with some stuff, then I promise I'll keep your dirty little secret all to myself. Cardin jostled the shorter boy in his grasp. What do you say? And John gulped, looking at the large man that had his shoulder before looking up at Cardin. What do you mean? Look, that paper Professor Uble gave us today. And Cardin scratched his head. See, I'd like to get it done, but I just don't think I have the time, and I don't know how in the world I will do it. But if you were able to help write it for me, well, I'd probably consider you my best friend after that, and I'd be more forced to keep your secret, at least until another paper or project is due. Oh. John hesitated before looking up at the confident smirk on Cardin's face. He wanted to deny, but what choice did he have? Literally, what other choice did he have? He nodded. I'll get right on it. Perfect. Oh, and make sure to make the paper different so he won't notice any similarities in what you write. Plagiarism can be such a bitch sometimes. The Winchester teen ruffled John's hair before releasing his hold on him and walking over to the ledge. Don't worry, John. I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship. John stood by silently and watched Cardin leap down and back into his room. He was the only one left on the rooftop for certain this time. As he looked down at his own feet, he furrowed his eyes and wanted to do nothing but curse worse than those really mature movies he saw on TV. He wanted to fight and argue, but couldn't. This was a hole he had dug himself into, and he needed to fix it himself. He just had to try and hope that Cardin could keep his word. End of chapter 31.